Thank you so much for coming. My name is Jay Bostwick, and I work with the International Field Studies programs. And this is the Field Studies Lecture Series, our first lecture this year. And we're really excited to have Carrie George. When she's at BYU, she's involved with Students for International Development. And she went on a couple of field studies, one in South Africa, one in India, and I actually overlapped for like a week or two with her field time in India. So I'm really excited personally to have Carrie here and excited to hear what she has to share. Since leaving BYU, Carrie got an MPA at Cornell and is now working in DC with an organization that just changed its name like 2 hours ago or something. And so she'll tell us what the real name is, but basically works with a company that does consulting, kind of ensuring social responsibility in supply lines. Is that right? Anyway, she'll tell us all more about that, but without any further ado, I'll turn the time over here. One quick thing though, sorry. When we get to question and answers, we are recording this, so we'll need to pass around the microphone. So if you could raise your hand and wait for the microphone to get to you, that would be great, so we can record your voice. Thanks.
In typical Sid fashion, Jay, can you pass the candies around? I don't have rooibos, but these are from Vietnam, and they're not as good as like the really quality ones, but you know, you do what you can. So let me make sure I get this right. Okay, my company was CSCC. It stands for Cal Safety Compliance Corporation. We just changed our name to our parent company's name, which is Specialized Technology Resources. Our mission is basically just to secure and deliver confidence worldwide. And by delivering confidence worldwide, what that basically entails is that my specific division, which was CSCC, is now called the Responsible Sourcing Division. And what we do is we actually go through supply chains, meaning anything from factories, production sites, transportation points, in shipping docks, anything around the world, and just check it out and make sure that things are both secure, meaning for the Anti-Terrorism Act, CTPAT, in the United States, we do security assessments, and we also do human rights impact assessments, environmental assessments, and just social compliance, meaning social and labor rights compliance. Our locations are all over the world. Sorry, it's not coming up very dark. I probably shouldn't have picked green as the background. Wait, one second. We have offices all over the world, including our testing facilities. So let's see. Our companies, the STR was separated into several different companies. These are the four main ones: CSCC, STR, Schuster, and STRR. Schuster is a consumer products testing company, primarily your food. So we would test how long foods would last before they became rancid, or the quality of the food, what actually makes up the food. STR does testing on your products, anything from your computer, how it breaks down. You know, you can actually shred it into pieces and then see what the components are, the individual components, or, you know, taking it apart and seeing the recyclability of it. And STRR is also another auditing type firm, but it primarily focuses on hardlines and electronics. And we at CSCC, we're mostly focused on apparel and textiles, but now because of the merging of the companies, we're kind of all over the map there. This is basically the product life cycle of anything that you purchase. So, you know, it comes from the product concept all the way through the store merchandising. I primarily focus in the highlighted areas, the social compliance auditing and the CTPAT, but I also do training and remediation now. That's been the past few months. I've just kind of transitioned to that position. But STR, my entire company, has services for the entire cycle here. And this just goes through, our founding. My specific division was founded in 1991 in reaction to a lot of the labor rights compliance issues that were happening in Los Angeles, and I'll go through those a little bit later, some of those examples. And it started out with a staff of 3. It was a grant from the Department of Labor to create some labor compliance manuals for factories in the Los Angeles area, and it's now this says over 250 employees. I haven't updated this, but we're about 300 right now worldwide. Our smallest offices are in the United States, in New Jersey and Los Angeles. I'm working remotely, primarily from DC, and then our biggest offices are in Shenzhen, China, Hong Kong, and Beijing are our biggest offices. We have offices in India. I was just in Jakarta, Indonesia, Vietnam, in our Ho Chi Minh City, Vietnam office, and working remotely with our Cambodian staff as well. These are some of the services. I primarily focus on education, program development, and monitoring, but I'm also working on a research project right now in our R&D department, and each one of these are different departments, our client services, the auditors themselves, training and education, and program development. So we have a general violations matrix that from every audit that we perform, and I'll go through what that audit entails in just a moment, but from every audit that we perform, we gather data, generalized data on that, and so that we can benchmark across industries, across product lines, and across the world, different variations of what's actually causing violations in various factories and supply chains. So this is basically what social compliance monitoring looks like. A little handy-dandy graphics there. So we go through and we have human rights, health and safety, environmental and supply chain and security and working conditions. And in each one of our assessments, we go through these sort of things. This is what a general, sorry, this still says CSCC, some of these things I haven't updated completely. But this is the general methodology of a one-day audit. A one-day audit will include a document review, which includes at least 3 pay periods. We'll go through the peak, non-peak, and just to the most recent time cards and working hours. Time cards, I mean, for those of you that have had jobs that you literally punch in, that's what we're looking at. But typically around the world, it ranges from anything from a handwritten document to something with a thumbprint, to that they have to do voice identification. So it's pretty elaborate and pretty extensive all over the world. We go through licenses and employee documents, primarily for age. We don't do anything regarding, particularly in the United States, and regarding immigration status. If they have the documents, we're not going to verify if they're completely authentic or not. We just have to make sure that the picture actually matches the person. The next thing is observation, health and safety walkthrough, and checking out ages. When I was in one of our China facilities, I saw a kid hiding out in the back, and I knew he was very young, and so, I immediately grab him, take him inside, and just talk to him for a moment about, through an interview. We do interviews, at least 10 individual, and we can do groups of 5. 3 to 5 primarily, and then we do opening and closing meetings with management. And that's basically what the day looks like for a one-day audit. I don't know if many of you are familiar with USAS, United Students Against Sweatshops, or Fair Labor Organization, Fair Labor Association, or RAP. A lot of these other entities, they have all different requirements, but this is the most basic type of day for an audit. We do anything from a one-day audit to, I have a factory that I've been working with for, it's 9 months now. And it can range in what sort of services we do, from training, remediation, to simply phone calls and talking to the clients and their vendors and through the supply chain. Just to give you an example of kind of what we look at, here's some pictures. So you might see here, this just looks like a normal fence, not a big deal, but what's wrong with this picture? When we address things such as forced labor, sometimes you have found situations where people are actually chained or locked into a building. But the more subtle nuances are when you have intimidation of some sort. In this picture, you'll notice the barbed wire at the top is actually facing inward into the factory as opposed to outward. So the question here is, why is it facing inward? Are we trying to keep people in, or are we trying to keep people out? The next thing that we have here is that this notice is telling the workers that they are not to be going to the restrooms in the following periods. And it actually defines the periods during and after their break times, and right before and after their lunchtime hours, which is basically indicating that they don't have as much freedom to use the restroom at their discretion and at need. Certain laws in certain countries will say this is not allowed, and regardless of what the country law states, this isn't going to be looked upon well in a Western mindset, and Western consumer isn't going to be okay with the fact that a worker can't use the restroom at their free will. Here, this is also talking about the workers' overtime for consecutive pay on Saturdays, and it's saying just like when they're going to be dictated that they have to work overtime. Again, it's another form of forced labor. This is just different hours of work that we'll look at. One of the biggest things that we have, particularly in China and Vietnam, are what we refer to as double books or fake books. And so you'll find that they'll give their customers, their end product customers, anything from like your Nikes to your Hewlett Packards to anyone that's going to be purchasing the product at the end, they're actually going to give them and their auditors different books than that they're actually recording the hours of work that have been received. And so one of the things that here you'll see that they have total excess of overtime, and then that this was the initial payroll records that they had, and they didn't actually have all the excess of hours that the people were working. These are just indicating like which cards are fake. I guess I'll use the pointer now. This is weird. Here, what you'll notice, these signatures, not many of you probably speak Mandarin, maybe some of you do, but these signatures are actually very similar. The cards are too perfect. They're perfectly aligned here. And a normal person, when they're punching their card, isn't going to carefully place the card in. They just kind of punch it, and so it's offline. But these are sort of things that our auditors will look for when they're going through and assessing the factory. Different things in regards to just housekeeping. You can't have this walkway blocked. Obviously not the most efficient form of an exit. Not all countries require that exits are marked out, but it's an international recommendation regardless. Exits here. This exit's completely blocked, obviously useless. If they're not going to use it as an exit, then they have to have it take down the exit sign. The other thing is this fire extinguisher here is too high. No one can reach it. And then here the doors are actually opening inward. So in the case of emergency, you want it to be able to go out so people can just run out as opposed to having to pull it open, because that can cause some fright. There it is. Here, just walkways, cluttered, and then, difference between the open and closed walkway. You can discuss this photo in that the drain, what issues here, the drains, are these properly cared for? They're tipped over. What sort of, this is a latex, this is open. What sort of MSDS, the material safety data sheet, do they have? Do the workers know that that's what it is? Is there an eye wash station or anything that would help the workers if they were exposed to the chemical? How do they dispose of these? These are all sort of things that we walk through. The industries that we address are anything pretty much. You have anything from soft lines and garments to agriculture and farms and mills. This is something that I'm getting into more and more, timber and forestry, which crosses over into a lot of environmental issues, particularly in areas of Indonesia and Brazil when you're talking about rainforest. Counterfeit fraud and label integrity. This is also going to go into brand protection. And NGO verification and collaboration. I work primarily with collaboration with NGOs and different initiatives to move ahead on making this industry more efficient. The CSR, or corporate social responsibility, is a really bloated industry, kind of like any international development industry. A lot of excess and a lot of wasted dollars and energy. So one thing that we're working on is different forms to be able to cross over and not have so much redundancy. Just notice this woman's wearing her mask. but then she's not wearing shoes that will actually protect her from damage or chemical if it's dropped on her. That picture was a little bit delayed. So here are some of the affiliations and accreditations that we work with in the industry. These are all people, if you're interested in this industry or interested in something that's not quite international development, it's not quite just policy, and it's not quite politics, it's a little bit of everything. These are all organizations that are good places for you to look at. Anything from Social Accountability International, Business for Social Responsibility, Fair Labor Association, ICTY Toys. So you're going to have a lot of crossover between what the businesses are doing and then how you're going to make a change in supply chains worldwide. So then just where are you going in your career? Changing customer and investor attitudes have led to increased need for responsible corporate behavior. The reason I got into this field, like Jay said, I went and did a field study in South Africa and one in India, and I found that I'm a pretty practical person, and I'm very driven by efficiency. And I'm also very driven to make things more effective for people on the ground. Labor and industrial labor particularly is happening worldwide, and globalization is a fact. It is what it is. You can buy locally and you can do as much as you can, but if you're not concerned about what's happening with everything else, that's a concern. The United States multinational industrial complex is running the world and has more money than any government that will ever have. And it has more influence on people worldwide. If you want to have influence on people, this is the sort of thing that you understand that this is where it's going. And so this is what drove me to this industry. In early corporate social responsibility started as just legal compliance and employee relations, basic HR, human relations. It moved into worker safety, anything from ethics, discrimination, recycling efforts, and even into philanthropy. Now it ranges the gamut here from diversity and labor standards all the way to carbon footprinting, life cycle analysis, which includes trying to close the loop so that you create something one day and that it can become something new and it doesn't have to be downcycled, that it actually has the same value of the product in the future. To health, AIDS, anyone that's working, you talk to a Nike, you talk to any huge company, Coca-Cola, they will say that anytime they're operating in the sub-Saharan region that AIDS is one of the biggest things that they have to deal with daily. It's not a nice thing or philanthropic thing. It's part of their work life and part of the dynamics that they have to understand to operate in those countries. Moving on, these are all the stakeholders that you would engage in this sort of work. It is very similar to an international development sort of realm, but one of the things is that my company is a for-profit company. I'm held responsible for every dollar I spend, and it has to have a return, which may seem unappealing, and did to me when I was at BYU. Down with the capitalists, let's bring it out, But the thing about what I really came to was just that I appreciated the responsibility that I had to have in this industry, and that I have to make sure that every action and audit and training that I do actually impacts the people that I'm working with. Otherwise, they're not going to use our services again. And that has something important to be said to it. So we work with anyone from media and business associations, insurance companies, universities. We just have a partnership right now with Harvard and MIT to go through our data and be able to analyze improvement over time with each engagement that we've had with factories, farms, or other sort of corporate entities. And socially responsible investors. Before I came to the company I'm at now, I was a researcher for 2 years with a company called not Social Responsibility Investors, but Innovest Strategic Values Advisors. And I researched on primarily the apparel sector, but also went through and did large manufacturers, HVAC systems, that's heating, ventilation, air conditioning, and aerospace industries. The percent of companies, this is an old statistic, but with CSR policies, you see 48% in the Americas, 60% in Europe, and 30% in Asia. This has definitely grown. This is a year and a half old. But the statistics now are definitely that the Americas are reaching Europe. This is also going to become more of a key issue as we see carbon cap and trade policies be going through probably within the next administration, regardless of who's voted in. We'll see other policies regarding multinational responsibilities. There's the Alien Tort Claim Act has had several cases actually reach the Supreme Court, and this is actually what this does is that multinational corporations can be held responsible for actions that they've had internationally, even if they do not own and operate those facilities. So this has created increased responsibility on the corporate entities that are housed in the United States. There's also similar acts in Europe that have been passed and are being more actively addressed by activist groups, NGOs, watchdog agencies, and other legal entities that are fighting for human rights and environmental issues. So basically, this is just a breakdown of kind of what we do, from elaborate corporate commitment and talking to our clients about what they are interested in doing, where they want to start, and where they want to finish. A lot of corporations will come to us and just say, we just want to do the bare minimum to know what's going on in our supply chains. We can argue all we want with them, but the point is that we need them to start somewhere and eventually convince them of what sort of implications not doing certain issues such as training or taking more responsibility in certain areas will have on them. Others will, go the gamut and really get involved as far as they can, educating their supply chain, prioritizing which supply chain interactions they're going to have, prioritizing which countries they're going to operate in and which ones have the most risk, and so on and so forth. The other thing that you might not be aware of is when you have let's say you have something like an Apple computer. Apple will have several different agents, several different subcontractors, and it just keeps going. So you have your main brand and retailer. It could be a Walmart, it could be a Target, it could be an Apple, it could be a Nike, it could be any of the above. And then it goes down and they have their second-tier suppliers. They have those tier suppliers, and you can have anywhere from, directly from the client to the factory, to like having at least 12 to 15 different steps along the chain. So it can become very complicated, and the training is one of the biggest components that we found, which includes not just face-to-face training, but being really innovative and creative in how you're going to address these supply chains, interacting with different cultures, different abilities in regards to technology, different understandings of business in general, and different interest levels in being compliant or not compliant to laws, standards, and just general moral codes that most people have. Environmental protection, this is another component. I may be talking a lot that seems just socially oriented, but all of this is going to come interplayed in this industry. We have clients now coming to us asking how are they going to start managing their paper use, how are they going to start talking to their suppliers about measuring what's recyclable, how much fabric are they throwing out? Is the glue that you're using water soluble so that it's not going to be so toxic? Can it be disposed of easily? And all of these sort of conversations are happening regularly. Particularly carbon footprint's a hot topic. No one really knows how to do it, but it's a catchphrase that people try to talk about a lot. But transportation is also one of the key things, particularly with the price of oil increasing and the increasing concern of what we're going to be doing in oil security area. Again, just the benefits for any company and all the way down the supply chain to a factory: enhanced reputation, competitive advantage, cost and risk reduction, improved quality. This regard, we try to talk a lot about if a factory can actually pay their workers and pay their workers correctly and know what hours they're working, they're probably able to assess your needs, the end client's needs better, and be able to be more on time if they know what they're actually doing in the basics of their business. improved efficiency and improved employee morale. And this goes not just for the factory workers, not just for the farm field hands, but also for anyone all the way up the supply chain, because in the end, no one wants to work for a company that they feel as though is exploiting the environment or workers around the world. This is just a long-winded version of that. Just to some examples, I pulled these a few months ago, just to give you ideas. Almost on any company's website, you're going to find CSR, corporate social responsibility, a responsible supply chain management section, a corporate governance. There's 1,000 different names for what these are, sustainability. But this, I mean, Ben & Jerry's is always, going to be, I mean, this is what they're founded on, is this idea of sustainability and what they're doing. But just to give you an idea that this is a marketing tool many people are using now. One thing that I've been focused on in DC is the Fair Trade Commission is right now focusing on how are we going to start labeling products so that they can't just claim greenness or social responsibility. Something else to think of if you're interested in policy and politics, that is going to be something that's going to be coming up in products and corporate behavior in the future. Patagonia has always pushed their environmental awareness and social compliance. This is just an example of one of the main protests against Disney for some of their sweatshop issues. You'll see some of the main unions here, Unite here. There's USAS, United Students Against Sweatshops, around here, kind of mocking the Nike symbol, the swoosh here, justice do it, and so on. This is like the biggest fear factor for most clients. They don't do this necessarily because they think it's the best thing, but in the end, it can be cost effective. It's not necessarily going to be free, and it's not necessarily going to go to their bottom line, but it will address a lot of their risk issues in the long run. Here's the United Students Against Sweatshops, focused primarily on universities. BYU, I don't think has a United Students Against Sweatshops entity. Most universities do. I think BYU's biggest issue was primarily the protesting aspect of United Students Against Sweatshops. I don't know if that's still the case, but they do good work and they don't do good work, as everyone does as well. So slave labor in the United States in the early 90s was the reason that this all began and was brought to the forefront of American consumer mindsets. It's not that I think American consumers really care as much, to be frank, but we are seeing that some people will pay more specifically for products that guarantee more environmental safety and environmental rights. Not as much with social, but it is changing. I will probably guess in the next 10 years that will change pretty dramatically, and it will be unacceptable socially to be buying things that are not guaranteed to have a certain social compliance and environmental compliance. But as it stands, it's been kind of wishy-washy. Let's see. Levi's and Guess were some of the first to get involved with social compliance. Moving through just different examples. I don't know, I don't even know the age range in this room, but when I was in junior high, there was the protest against Nike soccer balls that were happening in Pakistan, that were being made in Pakistan, controversial issues. Some kids were in some of the facilities. Some of them were being made by children. Others were being made by mothers, but that their children were in the room. There's a lot of complexity to any of the work that you do in supply chain management, and it's not always black and white. And just like international development, sometimes you have to make a call, and it can be a rough call. In this case, it was found that there was child labor that was just outright child labor, as you can see here. But there were also just a lot of families that were just working from home, and homework is a touchy situation. So you need a delicate balance of cultural and anthropological understanding, but also understand the politics that are behind all of this, both in business as well as the policies and the local government as well as international community. just university activist issues, and then just your resume. What are you interested in doing? My company is extremely dynamic. We're constantly changing. Like Jay said, we literally just changed our name officially to Specialized Technology Resources, and we are just going constantly. I I can't tell you how drastic things change daily. It's pretty fast paced. I love the people I work with. I don't think I've ever worked with more intelligent and dynamic people, and passionate, but in a different way. They're very driven, and I've just been impressed with this sort of industry in general. To get involved in sorry, I didn't capitalize Thailand. That wasn't an offense to Thailand. I just put this together this morning. So the things that I found that have been most influential for me have been my field internships and the research I did, policy, government, poli-sci classes. I took Chad Emmett's geography. I took a few of those. Poli-sci 472, yeah, Chad Emmett's great. 472, I think I basically love Valerie Hudson and Donnelly Bowen. Finance, accounting, business, Org 520, I think it was. I think that was Warner's class. He had a social entrepreneurship class that I worked with several people from SID on developing some small businesses, which gave me a mindset for a lot of this work, understanding what small businesses and small factories might be going through. Stats, econ, finance, public management. So then just moving down into the personal characteristics, being self-motivated. I think, I don't know, do they still have the capstone course, Chris?
I'm not sure.
Okay. Phasing out. That's tragic. The capstone course that Chris Meek taught, I think it was called 420. I can't remember exactly, but that was one of a really influential class for me, just in the terms of the information that was proposed there, but also understanding that was Chris had. I took your org, your labor. I think it's one of the few labor classes at BYU, and then the capstone course. And those were two things that exposed me to the idea of industrial labor relations, and then that got me into supply chain management, particularly when I was at Cornell. And then just the idea of being humble, and you have to be able to work well in groups. This industry is constantly growing, and if you want to make any changes happen, you have to be able to work with everyone and be able to be kind of that peon in the room that's going to do the dredge work until you can make some things happen. Being creative and being resourceful and having a little scrappiness, I think, are some key components. Kind of getting down in the dredges, but it's a different sort of dredge. Currently, right now, I'm living between Washington and D.C. I sleep on a bunk bed when I'm in New York. I have an apartment that I pay by the day when I'm in DC, and right now I'm creating a nonprofit entity for our industry, and it's going to be a professional association so that all auditors will be able to have their lawyer credentials as a separate person, and standardize some of the training that's in the industry. But what that does is just it allows people to know that I'll work with them, and regardless of the conditions. I wear a suit and nice dress whenever I need to, but then I'll get down with some factory workers whenever I need to in Cambodia or whatever. But it's a great industry. Some other companies that you might be interested in, I listed a lot of the accreditations and affiliations that you might be interested in earlier, but these are specific companies and consulting groups. Some of them would be direct competitors of ours. Some of them would just be people that we work with and partner with regularly. But I'd be happy to introduce you to people and get you involved at whatever level and talk to you more specifically about things that you might need in order to get into this industry, what sort of experience. Other things you might want to consider, language components, what sort of language training you have, and then what you can have in the future, what jobs might get you additional experiences, because there can be interim steps as well. That's pretty much all I have, so thank you very much, and questions?
As we go to questions, also we want to mention that Carrie's going to be having an information meeting later this afternoon at 3 o'clock across the hall. And so you have a chance to ask her questions there too as well. Any questions?
Can you clarify who hires your company to do these?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we were initially hired by brands and retailers. And now factories will hire us, government agencies, international finance companies, corporations, not without saying IFC directly. Any international banks will hire us to go check out. One thing that I don't know if you're aware of, the Equator Principles now are holding international banks responsible for their financing of different projects worldwide. And so that's one area that we've also been entering, just to be able to monitor regularly. So it's across the board, but our bulk of our revenue comes from brands and retailers and their factories.
So the main motivation for brands and
has been
is
fear.
For consumer. Okay, yeah.
It has been fear. I mean, just like frankly, it's a risk. It's a risk avoidance strategy.
But you said that you're also like a government. Are you government funded at all? No.
Not anymore. We
Not
started
anymore.
out that, and with the 3 people, and within I think 5 years, we went to a private status, and then we're just contracted with the DOL. But now we're completely separated from the DOL, and DOL does their own thing. And we were purchased by STR, this testing company that does all the product safety testing.
So when you go into like Cambodia, Vietnam, China, you have to have a knowledge of their regulations for workforce also?
Yeah, I don't do it myself typically.
Okay.
I will accompany a local staff member, but I'm not the expert. They're the experts.
Okay.
No, we don't do anything that involves some American person going over and trying to dictate that they know what they're talking about, because we don't. And so all of our local staff are completely the experts. I do audits pretty regularly in the United States, regardless of what station you are. I mean, our CEO does audits in the United States and in Latin America, because that's where his emphasis has been. I can do some in Southeast Asia, because that's more of my emphasis, but I still am just a second or third auditor. I'm not the lead.
Okay.
And I would just do management interactions if they spoke English.
And do you speak another language?
I used to speak Afrikaans.
Okay.
Don't anymore. And I studied French. So worthless languages in this industry. I'm starting to study Spanish. So I hope within a year I'll be speaking Spanish fluently.
Good.
Most people in my company speak 2 languages or more. So everyone in my office speaks 3 languages, I think, except for me. So, but it doesn't mean that limits you completely. You just have to be a little bit more creative, I guess.
How are you treated by the people you're auditing?
It depends on the type of facility we're going to. I'll give you an example of just this last one I did in Cambodia, which was just about 3 weeks ago. The management had double books. We knew they had double books, and we couldn't expose it because we couldn't expose it to them. We thought it would be a threat to some of the workers who had exposed it during private interviews and just passing us notes and things like that. So we hinted at the issue, and they were surprisingly receptive and talked to us about various issues that they were having with their local government, and that they were supposed to be a prized facility, and so they didn't want to expose that they did have excessive hours, and that they had received some supplies late, which caused them to have to push all their workers really hard during a certain period. Other times, I've never had this experience, but some of our auditors have been locked in facilities, threatened. Our CEO was held at gunpoint once. So it can be stressful. Those are the extreme cases. Typically, it's just a lot of yelling, and a lot of our auditors just trying to hold their cool and just be patient and get out of the facility. But typically, this industry is pretty extensive at this point, so they know what's coming. They know what's happening, and they know what we're going to be doing. And so it tends to be pretty smooth for the most part.
I actually have a question regarding your graduate work. Did you go straight from BYU to Cornell? And then secondly, how do you think your graduate work contributed to your to success in your career?
Well, I was planning on going to Sussex, and then circumstances, what they were, led me to just decide to go to Cornell. But that was mostly just because Chris Meek was like my advisor here, and I worked with him since I transferred to BYU from South Africa field study all the way through my capstone course. And I was just kind of fascinated by the idea of labor, but didn't really know if I thought it was legitimate or a good cause. Sorry, Chris. Or that was it. But when I went to Cornell, I was thinking I was going to be doing international agriculture. They're actually kind of like Utah State. They have they're the only Ivy League that is half public and half private. And so they have two different types of schools, and one of them is a state ag school, and one is the private endowed school. And I was thinking I was going to go into agriculture and do international agriculture and go worldwide and, talk about agriculture issues, even though I had never, done anything on a farm. And I was really frustrated by the work that was being done. I thought it was very ivory towerish. It wasn't getting down to the people. And I took an emerging markets class with Sarosh Kiravilla and a international labor law standards class with a man named Lance Compa, and I fell in love with it, and I work with him still today. So the work that I did at Cornell, I focused more on some of, they have a business program called Sustainable Global Enterprise. I did a immersion program with them and worked with DuPont and Nike while I was there, like discussing their issues at a corporate level. Realized I didn't want to work at the corporate level ever, just because it wasn't on the ground enough for me. I wanted to know what was actually going on the ground, and that's when I ended up coming here eventually to this company. So yeah, I think mostly what my graduate work did for me was allowed me time to mature as a person, and to kind of, I guess, focus some of my energies. I think anyone that knew me at BYU knew that I was a little bit everywhere, so it focused what I wanted to do, and kind of drove me to some of those things and made the connections. So, I mean, one of the biggest things about graduate work or any job that you take after leaving BYU is knowing who you'll be associating with and what sort of influence they're going to have on you. So. Okay, well, thank you very much, and I'll be around.